Today, we are celebrating 200 episodes. I cannot believe that we are at this point, and we're also going to be flipping the mic a little bit. I brought in my dear friend, Alesia Zawrotny, who is also a client as well as an avid podcaster. She is going to be interviewing me about my podcasting journey, so you'll be able to learn more about me, what I do, how I got started, who this show is for, why the transition, and how to work with us. There are so many nuggets and gems from this episode, lessons that I've learned from all these years in podcasting, and I'm so excited to share this fun episode with you today. Welcome to Podcasting Unlocked, the show for purpose-driven podcasters. I'm Alesia Galati, founder of Galati Media, and I'm here to share actionable strategies to help you amplify your message and grow your audience.
Alesia Galati, I am so excited. To the point of being giddy to welcome you to your own show and to celebrate 200 episodes of Podcasting Unlocked.
I know, it is wild. One can't believe it that we're here. It is strange, but exciting, and also feels like a huge milestone. So I am equally giddy and celebratory.
Well, it is a huge milestone, and I'm honored to be here celebrating with you. And, I know what it takes, and you've helped me do what it takes. And I love that you're walking your own talk, and we're going to dig into a lot of that today. But I'm actually going to take a cue from what I do at the start of my podcast and ask you to share a bit about who you are as a person professionally and answer the question, what lights you up?
Yes, I love this question that you ask. So who I am professionally, I am a podcast strategist, also the owner of Galati Media, which is a full-service podcast management micro agency where we help business owners, thought leaders who have impact-driven ideas and businesses launch podcasts that help them grow their business, but also make the impact that they want to make in the world. And we do everything from editing all the way through to marketing and repurposing, along with what I like to call my secret sauce of strategy, which I don't think enough podcast production companies offer, where they're just like, I'll do the work for you and then here you go, have fun. No, I want to make sure that our clients see success. And so having that strategy piece, I think, is so important and is why it's baked into all of the prices. But yeah, that's a bit about who I am professionally and what lights me up. Oh man. Okay. So I have to say podcasting.
That's fair. That's fair.
Feels silly to say, but at the beginning of this year, I launched a hobby podcast called We Read Smut, which is all about reading romance and smutty romance. And honestly, those conversations, just having a podcast that's not business and having those conversations that are like really energizing and exciting, that is what's really lighting me up right now. And so I love having the opportunity to be able to use my voice in a variety of ways.
Yeah. And what you're doing is you're creating a platform for not just communication, but connection and authenticity. We share a hobby, yes, but then you end up sharing so much more. And I know I find that as well, is that you have these conversations and there's something magical that happens that you could never have expected. So I'm not surprised that podcasting lights you up because, you've been doing it for a while. So let's go back a little bit and take us through the timeline. Go ahead and bring out the whiteboard if you want. And you've been locked into podcasting for a while and then began helping others do the same. So how did podcasting start for you and what motivated you to start?
I love the whiteboard analogy because I recently had a whole conversation with my husband about the X-Men timeline, and I whipped out the whiteboard and was like, here's the best way to understand what's going on. So I love that analogy. So my podcasting journey started, I would have to say, with the first podcast that I listened to in 2015, and it was Stuff You Should Know. And I loved being able to learn on my way to and from work. I was sick of the same 3 songs on the radio. I'm sure everyone can relate, right? Like, you've got your one station that you really like, but man, they keep replaying some of those songs a bit. And so I found podcasting and then eventually found some kind of mompreneur or mom online business owner podcasts. And it kind of just skyrocketed from there. Then in 2017, I want to say 16 or 17, I was a guest on a podcast and just sharing my journey about postpartum depression and self care as a mother and also being a working mom and like owning that rather than feeling guilty or letting other people make me feel guilty, like just really owning I want to be a working mom and I'm okay with that. And my kid can go somewhere else for a few hours while I rejuvenate myself with adult things. And so that was my first guesting experience. And then in 2018, launched my first podcast called The Honest Product Bench, where I talked with specifically e-commerce businesses and two e-commerce businesses on marketing strategies, inventory strategies, production like all the things that they would need to do. Kind of a one-stop shop was what I wanted to create with that podcast. And the reason that that one died out, and this is something that I work with my clients a lot on now and with myself, is because it got to a point where I had my day job and my podcast, and I ran out of content that was already ready to go. And so I didn't plan ahead. And that's something where batching is a huge part of my process now because of the quote unquote failure of that first one. And also, it got to the point where I was doing the same things in my day job, like working in manufacturing, working in inventory analysis, and was like, look, I cannot keep talking about this day in and day out on the podcast and in my day job. It's just getting to be too much. So I stopped that podcast. Then in late 2019, started one with my sister called Two Sisters and a Cult. That one is still available. We still get hundreds of downloads every month, which is wild to me. We get DMs from people saying, come back, please come back. But that one was like my first experience with co-hosting and found that to be really interesting navigating that dynamic, especially with someone who I know and love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being my sister. And that one, we saw a lot of really good success. And then in 2020, I was like, look, I think I want to do this for other people. COVID happened, which kind of nudged me toward the edge of you have to do this for other people, or this is a very viable option for you.
Mm-hmm.
And Lisa, you were the first person to say yes to, hey, I want to launch a podcast for someone. Let's see if we can do this. And so from 2020 to 2021, I didn't necessarily want to start a podcast on podcasting just yet. I wanted to get my feet wet in doing it for other people, doing the work. And then in 2021 was like, all right, fine. I guess I'll do a podcast. And that was Listeners to Leads, which is now rebranded to Podcasting Unlocked. And so that is a bit about my journey there.
I love that. I have mapped it out here. So we'll have a whiteboard ready if anyone wants to see the visual and the timeline. And you already anticipated my next follow-up question, which is, the challenges that come along with this and kind of those like lessons learned within. And the Honest Product Bench, was that the name? With that one, the idea of batching. And I mean, the minute you said that, I had a visceral response because that's something I'm always working on as well. But yeah, so besides batching and, preparing content, especially when you're tight on time, what else came up for you in terms of challenges and what'd you do to overcome them?
Yeah, so I would say one of the challenges was saying, hey, I'm enough to reach out to these really big guests. And that was something I learned very early on. I had an idea of I wanted to talk to certain product people, and they were pretty big people in the space. And people I had been following for years at that point. And very nervously sent them DMs and said, hey, I would love for you to be on my podcast. Here's what I want you to talk about, right? Which I think is really important when we're sending something to somebody really busy,
Yep.
right? Or someone who has a lot of experience in guesting or a lot of opportunities, being very specific on that pitch. And I said, I haven't launched yet. So this was even before I launched, but I would love it if you could be on my show. And I anticipated a no right out the gate. And so the people that I reached out to, every single one said yes. So it made me realize that maybe I wasn't reaching high enough for those guests, and maybe I should have reached a little higher to see if there were other people that would say yes to being on my show. And so that's something that I have definitely implemented in this show, in being able to reach out to people and saying, I know what I'm talking about. I have an incredible audience. It doesn't matter how many downloads I'm getting, I can ask this person to be on my show. And if they don't say yes, then that's okay. The answer is already no before I even reach out. So it's all right to reach out to them. So I would say that is another lesson that I learned. And then additionally, something that I learned, not so much in the beginning, but more so from this show and having conversations with people, is that, and I've mentioned this sporadically on this show. So if you are an avid listener, you already know what I'm going to say. But this idea that when I started this podcast, I was adamant that you should not start a podcast unless you planned on going forever or for an extended period of time, because the quote unquote failure rate of podcasts is so high, right? 90% of people don't make it to 25 episodes. And so, how can I show up well for people who aren't committed to making it to that point? And I had to really sit with myself and say, is that actually true? Right? Yes, I have my ideas of what people should do, or what I think people should do, but really it's up to the person to decide what kind of podcast strategy works best for them. And so I've gotten a lot looser with my ideals around that, of it doesn't matter if you want to do a limited series. A limited series is also a great strategy for podcasters. And so the show's definitely changed my mind on some things, which I don't think I anticipated, because I can tend to be a bit like, no, this is the way to do it, and there's only one way to do it. And so, yes.
I mean, you have had the experience. I love that you've been in the trenches, right? You've done the thing. You've had the different iterations and all the lessons learned. So it makes sense that you have best practices and sage advice, but you're also willing to grow and learn. But I think the distinction is, and listen, I have regular strategy sessions with you. I feel like the success of my show is so directly related to you and your team, and I'm so grateful for that I've been able to kind of witness, firsthand how you go about offering strategy, but also how you've gone about in your evolution of what can work. And something you and I have in common that I do as a productivity coach, is say, okay, what's best for you? And the real key here is, it's not that you're like, oh, you can have a long show or you want to work on that, or you can have a short one. It's not even that permission. It's the intentionality behind it, right? You're digging down
Yes.
to the why.
Yeah, I think that's so important too. There's a episode that'll go live in a week or two from this one, where it's a live recording of a strategy session. And I talked to the person who, she has a podcast where specifically talking to millennial moms who are busy, they're maybe on the cusp of burnout. And I said, look, you have some options here. I think it would make sense to reduce the length of your episodes. And I'd be curious what your statistics say on that front, of how much of your episode people listen to. But if you're someone who cannot talk any less than 45 an hour, then that's okay too, right? Like, you get to decide. And sometimes your audience is gonna be along for the ride. But just being aware, I think, helps to be able to say, like, this might not work for another podcast, but for you and for your audience, one, you get to decide what's going to work best for you. These are always just recommendations. But also, I kind of know what I'm talking about, since I've been doing this for so long.
Exactly. You're able to anticipate, I think, more quickly, because you've been doing it for so long, that this is what's going to happen with a certain audience. And this is what the numbers are telling us. And here's how you can tweak. And we've done that so much for my show. And it makes sense that when you're talking about productivity and people who have very little time, or they're struggling to manage it or themselves, that the shorter solo episodes are going to be fire. And they have been. And I've enjoyed that. But I had to grow into that. There is an evolution when you're doing it. And that is the perfect segue into your evolution with this podcast, not the least of which is a rebrand. But it's not just that, but the purpose behind it. I know listeners to leads and the lead generation was the thing, but you talk so much more about the impact and how we can be change makers. Tell us a bit about that evolution to Podcasting Unlocked.
Yeah. So while I love talking about generating leads for your business, and those are my ideal clients, like those are the people that I love to work with, where
Mhm.
they're using their podcasts to really drive revenue and see that ROI. I also realized that my clients don't always necessarily listen to my podcast. So, how can I make sure that I'm reaching a wider audience that cares about more than just leads? Because, yes, it's great to have leads and it's great to do all these things. But when I was having conversations with people who are actually listening to my show, the things that they would tell me were I was able to accomplish this and I was able to see success in this way. And I was able to connect with someone who I never would have been able to connect with otherwise. And there were so many different levels to what a podcast was able to do for my listeners. And so I thought, how could I capture that, but also really own my own personal shift, which was, yes, generating leads is cool and we will make money, but what is the impact that we're making in the world? I feel like right now, the world is especially scary for a lot of folks. And then when you add in the increase of censorship on social media, we have podcasts as a way to use our voice, to express ourselves. And as someone who's part of a few marginalized communities, I think that that is so important. And I wanted to own that part of myself and also kind of carry my audience along the way. I'd say that was kind of the evolution for the shift. And then the name, I had a podcast that last year, 2024, I did it for the entire year, all solo episodes, 10 minutes or less, answering podcasting questions. And that was called Successful Podcasting Unlocked. And really used that as an SEO place. But as I was kind of thinking, how do I want this podcast to show up? I knew I wanted to do kind of a nod to that show, but also thinking about, all right, it could be impactful podcasting unlocked. Cool, let's try that. But then as I was thinking about it and talking to people, I actually was like, you know what? Podcasting Unlocked is so much easier to remember. It's so much easier for people to type in. They're not, I can also add in anything at the end of the title that really shows, hey, this is for impact driven businesses. So let's go with Podcasting Unlocked so people clearly know what the show is about. And so that was the evolution of Listeners to Leads to Podcasting Unlocked.
Yeah, and I love how it all ties in now. And then, as you said, you can adjust based on a tagline or based on a descriptor or based on where you're posting it. And we actually did something similar with my podcast as well in adjusting the tagline and tweaking that way. So you taught me, a rebrand doesn't have to be big for it to matter. So touching upon the audience, as you said, they were a big driver in like the adjustments that you made in being able to serve everyone and really being able to support. I like the word change makers, right? And by the way, I feel that way about my show in that there's a lot of, we'll say, conversations that are being adjusted or deleted or blocked in a way out in the world. And I'm like, come at me, bruh, because I'm still going to talk about this stuff on my podcast. So I love that. But tell us a bit about your audience. At first, I would have thought it's experienced podcasters, but I feel like it's much wider than that. Who's listening to you and who needs to be? Who do we need to tell about this?
Yes. So I would say anyone who is considering launching a podcast, all the way up through seasoned podcasters. I think that so often, especially in the online space, there's so much information. And so I wanted to make sure that I had a hub of information that one, I could show up as an expert, but then also I could have my guests come on and share their experience and really showcase that there's no one right way to podcast, which the goal in that is to alleviate some of the pressure that we put on ourselves, whether that's externally or internally, put on ourselves to show up perfect as podcasters. And so that's something that I really wanted to drive for the listeners, and them being specifically usually people in the US, I would say new or established podcasters, but all the way up through I'm thinking about it. I even have a podcast episode, and we'll make sure we link it in the show notes, where it's like, how to know if you should start a podcast, right? So there's lots of information throughout the whole range of the podcasting experience through monetization, or I want to join a podcast network, or how do I market my podcast on email or social media or Pinterest, right? Like having a variety of avenues to the point of there's no one right way to do it, that you get to choose what's going to work right for you. And you can pick and choose from the quite varied menu that we have available.
So back in the day, choose your own adventure books were my favorite. And I really feel like Galati Media is a choose your own adventure. And I felt like you and I have definitely grown together. So I've seen you create all of these different resources for all these different levels. But one of the things that was a big takeaway for me and something I appreciated about you so very much was that you got in there with the strategy before the thing happened, before you created. So I love that, you can help people who are like, I'm thinking about it, or I feel like, or I've been meant to for the longest time, or I'm nervous about it, or I'm wondering. That's the best time to get in there and to really understand your why and your purpose and what can be done. And you avoid so many problems, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But speaking of getting ahead, one of the things I love in your yearly reports for your clients that I've always appreciated, because I feel like I'm getting, the behind the scenes, is your ability to forecast what's happening. You really have your finger on the pulse of the industry. And sometimes, I try not to take that for granted. But you share, a heads up of what's in store. And I would love to know, as of right now, what you see that's coming down the pike for us, and also how Podcasting Unlocked is gearing up to support those trends.
Yeah, I do think we're going to see a very big influx of podcasters this year with the censorship that we're seeing. And I said this back in November that we're going to see this. And I think that we're already starting to see it. And it's really interesting navigating this. And I can't tell you how many times on threads in the last week I've seen someone say, I just launched my podcast, or I think I want to launch my podcast. Like, so many people want to do this. And I think that what I wanted to bring to this year's content around that idea is, yes, we have resources for those who are trying to start, but also how can we support people who have been here and are maybe feeling a little frustrated with the influx of new podcasters? And so how can we address those concerns or help support them in really doubling down on, okay, let's focus on your show instead of what everybody else is doing, and make sure that we're growing it in a really strategic way. So really focusing on that. I also wanted to really categorize the content this year. So not so much with the guest episodes, but with the solo episodes, every quarter having a theme instead of being a little more sporadic, which allows me then to create lots of worksheets for the episodes, which we'll have at the end of every quarter available for people to access. So that is another thing, that just wanting to shift and change and see what works best for me this year, which also allows other people to see, hey, guess what? You can change your podcast however you want, the format, how you show up every year. You can change that however you see fit. I also think that marketing the show is going to get a lot more difficult. A few years ago, I would say 2-ish years ago, Reels, TikToks, etc., was the big thing. Now when people see them, unless it's two dudes talking, which is kind of frustrating, but typically when people see them on their apps, they tend to just keep scrolling. And so trying to find different ways to address that marketing need of, okay, so you're having some issues getting traction on social media and moving those people from social media to your podcast. All right, what are some other places that we can access your audience? Is it Pinterest? Is it SEO via your blog? Is it a LinkedIn newsletter? Like, what are those other ways that are really working right now? And kind of following those trends and sharing that information with my audience, or with, one-on-one strategy sessions I do, I'm always like, all right, we talked about what you wanted to talk about. Here's how you can grow your show right now, because I know that everybody wants to do that. And then also focusing really heavily on the data. So this is something that I'm doing a lot more so with clients than on the show, but I think that it's important, and we'll probably have some episodes coming up on this topic, because I'm finding that the information that we have on just our podcast hosting platform is not enough. We need more information to be able to make decisions. And if we don't know where to find that information, or we don't know what we're looking for because one, we haven't been clear on our goals, or we just aren't aware, then how can I make sure that people understand where to look for this information? So you will most likely see some type of workshop up around podcast stats coming this year, as well as some podcast episodes focusing on that. So those are some things that I see kind of happening in the coming time for people, as well as how I plan on addressing them on the show.
Yeah, I really appreciate so much about that. The idea that there will be a big influx. I welcome that, but it is important as an existing and experienced podcaster to be like, keep doing you, boo. I've always said, eyes on your own paper, right? But it's so important to say, well, what does that mean? And also, what does that mean as a community of podcasters? And how can we encourage each other and then also keep focused on what we're doing and grow with the trends? And I've even been a guest on brand new podcasters' podcasts, even though usually I work with more experienced at this level, because there are so many who are experienced in business.
Right.
And now a podcast is the next step. So there's so many nuances. And I think that's what's so important about what you do, not only as a team to help produce the podcast, but as a coach and consultant in helping us. So some of what you've described already is incredibly important in what makes your approach unique. So data points. I was thinking about lead generation, for example, and how that used to be the thing that was the focus. Well, that's one data point of the
Right.
impact that you have out there and how you're connecting with people and how they may possibly work with you or do something really important with the information that you're sharing with them. There's so much happening. Could you tell us a bit more about like the way you work with somebody, maybe an example? There's so many success stories. I know that you probably are already thinking of one.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways. Previously, we had only done the kind of done for you services rather than, and yeah, I had the one-off strategy session, but this year I wanted to shift that a bit to be able to focus more on how can I serve my ideal listener or ideal audience in a way that really benefits them, but is also cost effective for them. Because I understand that not everyone who listens to the show has access to the kind of capital they would need to work with a team like mine. And that's okay, right? Like there's no shame in that at all. But then also knowing the impact that I want to make in the world, how can I address that need? So on the team side, like I said at the beginning, you can do everything from editing only all the way up through full service, and strategy is included in everything, right? So even if you're just like, hey, I want you to edit my podcast, strategies included in that price. So wanting to make sure that that is visible to people. When people want to launch a show, I still only do full service launches, because we've tried to do a kind of half and half where they have some strategy, we're just doing the editing, and those ones aren't as successful. And I don't say that to be like, look at me, I do so great, but also like 50 shows launched in at this point. I feel like I know what I'm doing. And so to be able to replicate that is not difficult on my end. And so making sure that the people who are coming in for launch are getting that full package. And so really focusing on that. But for the people who are tend to be listening to the podcast, we have quite a few ways that you can work with us. So there's our group program, which we will be having soon. I don't have a date yet, but we'll be doing that soon. I really want to make sure that I can have that for people. We have free workshops, DIY stuff, worksheets, the likes, all of that stuff. There's tons of resources on the website. For one-on-one strategy sessions, we have everything from a 1 hour to a VIP day, all the way up through 6 months. And so what I love about this 6 months is that what that allows us to do is really work together in a really strategic way so that by the end, one, you're not going to see results in 3 months because that's not how podcasting works. But by the end of the 6 months, you should have achieved the goal that you set out to do that we established at the beginning. And so meeting on a regular basis. And what I love about this is that it helps hold people accountable, but then also is someone in their ear saying, here's exactly what you need to do next. Here's the roadmap. And so we saw this recently with someone who they used to be a client and they brought their production in house, which that's okay, right? Like you do what you need to do. And they had been with us for years. And so within the first 2 months of them leaving us, they saw a huge dip in their downloads. And this is not abnormal, right? Because there are a lot of nuanced things that, yes, I can express to them of like, hey, we do this, 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 this. But if they're not replicating it, then they're going to see those numbers fall off. And so I got on a call with them and I was like, here are all the ways that you are kind of doing it wrong at the moment, but also you get to choose if this is something that you want to do or change or adjust. And then here's what my recommendations are. And by the end of the call, he was like, all right, yeah, so we'll do it on our end. We'll do these things. Let's schedule another call for 2 months from now to hold us accountable because that's just life, right? Like you are in the everyday grind of I've got my podcast and I'm producing it and I'm scheduling it and I'm maybe throwing it up on social media, but I'm not seeing the growth that I want to see or I'm not seeing the impact that I want to see. Am I even successful? All right, well, what does success look like for you, right? So having someone to kind of guide you through that. And so that's why I love that 6 month program. And like I said, it's one-on-one. So it's very tailored and custom to the person. And I wanted to make it affordable. So it's less than $700 a month. So something that is affordable for people, but also ideal for this listener who is like, look, I don't know that I can give you 2 grand a month, but I can maybe do 700 to see the success that I want to see with my show. And then maybe eventually it'll get to the point where I have sponsors or my business is bringing in enough money from the show that I can easily afford someone to do full service for it.
I know firsthand how important those strategy sessions are. And I mean, this is coming from a productivity coach, and I do walk my own talk. You know, I'm organized. You know, I do what I'm supposed to do. You know, I have consistently produced a lot of podcast episodes, right? I've written,
Yes.
and recorded so many of them. And so I get it, but also I have these moments, you know what I'm talking about, where you think something and then suddenly you're second guessing yourself, or you're freezing, or things do change around you, and then you're like, wait, do I change with it? Do I not change? Do I hold course? What am I adjusting? And then there's always these updates. The platforms are sending you these updates, and social media is constantly talking about things, and you help filter out the noise and figure out what belongs, what to pay attention to. And man, that's like true productivity. And then you get to focus on the fun stuff and also that permission to do what you love. And that ties us right back into the connection and the authenticity and making an impact. So speaking of all of these resources and these ways to work with you, let's just remind everybody about the website and any of the socials you might like them to find you on.
Yes. So you can go to helpmypod.com, and that has all of our resources as well as how to either work with the team or work with me one-on-one if you're like, yes, I need Alesia in my life.
You do. You do. You'll thank me. All right. Helpmypod.com. And we'll have that in the show notes, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So with that, any final thoughts, words of encouragement, any kind of idea within everything that we've talked about that it's like, if you're going to take something away, take this with you?
I would say that you get to decide what your show looks like. Don't let anyone bully you or coerce you into doing it any other way than feels right to start, and you get to shift with it. So I think that so often we feel like, oh, well, I started it this way, or I started my show in a certain way and it's not performing the way I want. So let's scrap it and start something brand new. Or, maybe I'm feeling frustrated because I am at the point where I'm burnt out, right? You get to take a break, and that is okay. There are no rules to this. There are no regulations to this, which is cool. And also, maybe they should make some microphones a little more expensive for some podcasts. But I think that it's an opportunity for you to share your message. And so if you're feeling like, oh, I'm feeling stuck or this is feeling a little sticky, then how can you release some of those expectations to keep moving forward or give yourself some space to think about if you want to keep moving forward? I would say that would be my advice for anyone.
I love that advice. It's staying true to who you are, and it's okay if that changes and going with that. Okay, wonderful. And staying true to who I am, I need to wrap us up here by telling you how grateful I am for you.
Oh.
As a friend, as a podcast producer, and the best strategist around, as someone who gives so freely, the number of resources that you have for podcasters it's a little insane, but and I mean that with all the love. It's wonderful. And so I celebrate you as a person, as a podcaster, as a coach and consultant, and just as an all around wonderful energy in this world. So as I say on my podcast, I'm grateful for you and that you shine your light so brightly in this world.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate you. And before we go, let's make sure we tell people where they can connect with you as well. Everybody go listen to Lisa's podcast because it is fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it's the Positively Living podcast. We are all about shame-free productivity conversations. And now you can see why Alesia and I get along so well because she's about shame-free podcasting. And so, yeah, you can catch me. You're on an awesome podcast here. Hop on over to Positively Living or find all of the places where we can hang out at positivelyproductive.com. Okay, and with that, one more time, congratulations on 200 episodes. Can't wait for 200 more.
I know. Thank you.